All right, welcome everybody. My name is Liberty, and I'm a member of the Firestorm Collective. Today, we're excited to be hosting two writers who have really outsized impacts on us, both as readers and activists. And that's Dean Spade and Kai Cheng Thom, who I promise are here and will be coming on video shortly. They're going to be discussing Dean's newest book, Love in a Fucked Up World, which digs deep into the question of how we can show up in our closest relationships in ways that align with our values as anarchists, abolitionists, and participants in communities concerned with liberation. If you haven't attended a Firestorm event before, just to share a small bit about our bookstore, Firestorm is an almost 17-year-old radical bookstore owned and operated by a queer feminist collective in Southern Appalachia on the land of the Cherokee people. And I think it's safe to say that tonight is probably the largest event we've ever hosted on Zoom, with a little over 400 registrations, which is amazing. And I think this is also a particularly fun event for us because for the last 2 months, members of our community have been meeting every other week to read and discuss Love in a Fucked Up World together. And it's been a really generative space after Hurricane Helene, as we've just generated a large number of these types of spaces to come together and explore new ideas together. So tonight, the event is also a fundraiser for Gazan families, and we'll be hearing from Monica of Minnesota Families for Palestine. With your help, we've already raised, I think, about $3,400, and I'll be sharing a donation link in the chat for folks who would still like to contribute. A little note about the platform. We are using Zoom's Q&A tool tonight. So if you want to ask questions at any point, and I would encourage you to do this, please find that Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen. There's also an open chat where you're welcome to kind of share thoughts and ideas. But if you have prompts for Dean and Kai Cheng, please do put those in the Q&A so we can keep track of them. All right, we're going to get started now, and I'm just going to share a couple quick bios for our panel. Dean Spade, as you may know, has been working for queer and trans liberation, prison abolition, and an end to war for 25 years. He's the author of Normal Life, Administrative Violence, Critical Trans Politics, and The Limits of Law, and Mutual Aid, Building Solidarity During This Crisis and the Next, and is also the director of Pinkwashing Exposed, Seattle Fights Back. Thanks so much for being here, Dean. Kai Cheng Thom is a writer, performer, somatic coach, and mediator based in Toronto. She's the author of the Lambda Award-nominated novel and personal favorite, Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars, a dangerous trans girl's confabulous memoir, as well as the poetry collection, A Place Called No Homeland. Her latest book, Falling Back in Love with Being Human, is a collection of letters and poetry. And these are all books that you can find from Firestorm if you are looking for copies. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and welcome Dean Kai Cheng, and possibly also go ahead and bring in Monica to share just a little bit more about the fundraising. Thanks so much, folks. And thank you so much to Brandon, who is currently doing our ASL interpretation. Really appreciate you. Hey, Monica.
Hey, hello. I will try to share my screen. Are we good? Is it happening? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Hello, everyone. It is such an honor to share space very briefly with two writers and thinkers who I deeply admire. Like, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? I am extremely grateful to everyone involved here for being so willing to use this event as a fundraising opportunity, and so grateful to everyone who did donate while signing up for this event. It means so much. If anyone wants to do so now, the link is on top right here. The QR code takes you right there as well, and we will put it in the chat. So just briefly building on, the principles that, Dean laid out in his book, Mutual Aid, I want to quickly draw attention to the urgent need for all of us in the Imperial Corps to mobilize towards sending material aid to Palestinians trying to survive. I work with a small collective, Minnesota Families for Palestine. We try to raise survival funds for 36 people, 13 of whom are children. And these are all the families of our dear friends, just to try to provide basic supplies every week. And the goal every week is $2,500. And so to hear that we've already been able to raise that through this event is so exciting. These are our loved ones in Gaza, Syed, Mohammed, Amir, Moaz, and their families. Just pausing for interpretation. Syed's family is, so everyone here is in Gaza except for Syed, who evacuated to Egypt alone last Eid. Mohammed's family, his parents were just medically evacuated and need surgeries immediately, but don't have the funds to receive them. Amir's family and Moaz's family have little children, especially a 10-month-old daughter who needs very expensive basic baby supplies. And as you probably know, that since Ramadan started, the occupation has prevented any aid, any goods from entering Gaza at all. So everything is extremely expensive and it is extremely dire situation. And the fact that our money is funding this genocide brings to mind the responsibility of our need to divest from our entitlement to comfort and invest in continued mutual aid and material reparations. By, if you're able to, planning ahead for sustained ability to support, remembering that our base comforts are afforded by settler colonialism and violence, and thinking about what potential things we can give up in order to send reparations and aid directly. And some of the positionality questions that I think about in this context are relationship to whiteness, settler identity, owning property and land, generational wealth, access to advanced degrees, little to no debt, stable income, and access to healthcare. These are things that are also based on like generational access to wealth and whiteness, all these things for many reasons that I hope people think about when they think about how to offer reparations and material aid. We are a very small group of very disabled people who could very much use help. So if you would like to help us fundraise, there are so many ways that are afforded to many types of ability and whatever is available for you to do. Please reach out on one of these platforms. Find me on Instagram or email me at this email right here. And that is all from me. Just gonna pause for interpretation. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Brandon.
All right, I think that we're gonna switch over and start. Thank you so much, Monica, for organizing this fundraiser and letting this event be part of it. And thank you to Liberty and everyone at Firestorm, and to Brandon, and of course to Kai Cheng for being part of this event. I'm very excited to be here with you all. I thought I might start by just reading the conclusion of the book, just to kind of bring us into some of the dynamics of the current moment that I think are mentioned there, and then we'll go into a conversation and then a Q&A. Many of us turn towards self-help books with hopes of instantaneous change. Capitalism sells promises of total health, wealth, and blissful happiness. But in reality, being alive is a wild, constantly changing mix of beauty, suffering, agony, contentment, and dissatisfaction. No matter how we fight it, everything around us is impermanent. Everything we want and love will come to an end, just as our lives will. We have to approach both our relationships with other people and our own healing with a humble outlook and reasonable expectations. One question often guides me when I'm stuck. What am I so afraid of being seen doing that I'm willing to limit my steps toward what I want in my life? If you use the methods outlined in this book, you might experience more emotional awareness. You might begin to notice the moments when you are gripped by autopilot reactions. You might hear cultural scripts like the romance myth or scarcity thinking running through your mind and find ways to resist their pull. You might be able to think, that's not me, that's not mine. You might notice when you're reacting in ways that are out of proportion to the situation. You might recover before you do or say something hurtful to someone you love. Or you might say those hurtful things, but be better able to apologize. You might gossip less. You might find your conflicts bring you closer to others rather than damaging your relationships to them. You might become better able to say yes, no, and maybe to other people. You might find that autopilot reactions still arise in you, but they don't determine your behavior and you recover more quickly. You might not feel as much shame about them. You might find that people or situations that used to really get under your skin just don't get you as worked up anymore. It has helped me to return to the phrase, healing is a spiral staircase. I think about myself walking a circle like a clock. As I heal, I will re-encounter again and again the wounds that have shaped my life and the coping mechanisms I developed to get through rough times. Each time I re-encounter them, rather than being ashamed to still be affected or disappointed that I'm not fixed yet, I try to cultivate acceptance. This is the hand I was dealt, and everything in my life, all that is beautiful and all that is rough, all that is shared and all that is lonely, stems from this same hand. My task is to cultivate discernment and clarity about these conditions so that I can act with compassion and intention, rather than being blown around by the cultural forces that try to shape me and a past I can't change. I can be grateful for the coping mechanisms I came up with as a kid and also decide to update how I react to the world around me, to develop habits and foster choices that get me more of what I want and better align with my values and beliefs. I also have to remember that I'm not something to be improved. There is no fixing, even as I seek to cultivate new skills. Life is not going to get easier in the years to come. The crises we are facing are real and worsening. Most of us are in some denial about this because it's so overwhelming, hard to comprehend. Reports of global heating, mass extinctions, sea level rise, extreme weather, failing crops, ocean acidification, zoonotic diseases, deforestation, and melting ice sheets have become more dire than scientists had predicted even just a few years ago. The industrial consumer society that created this crisis has already caused such irreversible damage that the planet and our lives will certainly be irrevocably altered. Many people are already acutely affected. Even if all governments in the world stopped pandering to the interests of the ultra-wealthy, and even if all industries immediately stopped polluting, neither of which is happening, the damage already inflicted is irreversibly changing the planet. We can and should try to reduce any harm that we can, but we also have to face the reality that our lives are going to keep getting harder. Even as this previously preventable collapse unfolds, we have been misled about how dire things are. We've been led to believe that governments and experts will fix it. The catastrophic impacts are multiplying, yet we are fed feel-good stories about renewable energy and urged to funnel our profound fears and desires for collective action into individual consumer choices, social media posts, voting, and donating to nonprofits whose efforts at policy reform only tinker with the overarching systems causing the crisis. This is the reality of our situation, and in the times to come, we're going to need each other more than ever. As I work to let this incomprehensible and heartbreaking truth into my life, I am filled with anger and grief. But hand in hand with that grief is an even deeper appreciation for the beauty of the living planet and the bold resistance and care that people demonstrate every day in the face of these conditions. I am inspired to further divest from the systems of greed that have created this mess and to shake off all the bad ideas and habits they've implanted in my psyche. I ask myself, how do I want to be in these times? Again and again, the answer I come to is that I want to face up to these tragedies with an open and loving heart. I want to be part of collective efforts to care for others and stop as much destruction as possible. I want to appreciate every remaining moment of my life, even knowing that much is out of my control. I want to live according to my principles and priorities, not wasting time on nonsense I've been told is important. I want to be deeply connected to the people I love. I want to find more ways to care for strangers and create survival strategies that are collective and inclusive, not distrustful or insular. I think I'll stop there and bring my friend into this conversation.
Oh, wow. Hi, everyone. I just want to take a moment to really deeply appreciate and acknowledge the reading you just offered us, Dean. The tenderness and the beauty, the painfulness and the equanimity of those words, and just let them land. Yeah. I'm really deeply honored to get to be a small part of this amazing book event. Um, Dean, when you reached out to me, I think a few months ago now, to ask if I would provide a blurb for your book, I was like, oh, wow, it's the famous Dean Spade. I have been reading and learning from your work since I was 18, which is like a whole bunch of years ago. I'm not going to say how many. And I was like, I wonder what this book is going to be about. Then I read the description and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so much and so deeply um, the book I've been longing for. I think it is a book that many of us have been longing for um, because it is about how to be with one another, how to be in that place of open-hearted honesty that you just read about so beautifully. And I think part of what makes your work so uniquely powerful to me, and I suspect to many others, is the precision and the intelligence the applicability of your work. Like, this is a book that in many ways is a super practical self-help textbook. There are pop-outs in all of the chapters that ask helpful reflection questions. Like, it's a book that's meant to be used actively, but you also never lose the deeply meditative spirit that holds the complexity of the times that we're living in. I think that this is a book that offers us so many answers to questions that have been burning in the heart of queer community for many years. And also, you don't shy away from the fact that we live in an unfolding mystery, that we can be clear about what our values are, but we don't always know how to respond to all the situations that emerge between us as we're hooking up and raising hell. Um, and you don't pretend that we're not living in a tragedy. You're really refusing to feed us another cheerful story, but you're also refusing to give in to pessimism. This is something I deeply admire and also really deeply aspire to. I'm so, so grateful that you've stepped into the world of self-help and therapeutic psychology. We've needed this book for a really long time. My life personally would have been much improved had I had access to this book as like a little queer punk anarcho-hellion in Montreal in the 2010s. And I'm excited to get to ask you some questions here in front of 222 people tonight. Thanks so much, Dean. I'm going to give you a round of ASL applause and just imagine, feel that the other 221 folks are doing the same. Okay. I just said a lot of things, and I see that some folks are reacting in the chat. Dean, how would you feel if I asked you some provocative questions about your book?
I'm into it. Can't wait. Can't
Amazing. Okay. Well, all right. I'm going to start with like a softball one, actually, which is so you are like kind of making a shift here into the world of therapeutics, which feels to me like it's in step with some really important cultural lineages and trends that have been happening in queer activism for a while. I want to acknowledge particularly that Prentice Hemphill has had a book come out on the connection between trauma healing and social transformation as well. Super great book. I invite folks to check that out as well. Adrienne Marie Brown, of course, has always been in this space too. And generative somatics and the work of Stacey Haynes has held down politicized trauma healing in the States for quite some time. I also just kind of feel like when I started studying social work an unnamed amount of years ago, it was kind of unpopular. Like, people were like, ugh, therapy, it's so colonial, which is true. We're going to talk about that momentarily. Self-help, so capitalist, also true. And now I kind of feel like many, many, many tender queers that I know, I say that word with love, are studying to become somatic healers and psychotherapists. And I think, honestly, I am kind of happy about that. I'm curious, what provoked for you, like a longing to take a deep dive into the world of relational theory?
These are such juicy questions. Also, thank you for your incredibly kind words. Obviously, I asked you for the blurb and to do this event with me because your work has such a big influence on me and all the people in my community. So it's really, this is a very big treat, and I've been really looking forward to this. There's a few things. Like, one, I've been reading self-help books since I was a kid, and they were some of the first books I ever read. And I've always really needed them and needed like every healing method I could. I will try anything. Like I'm like, oh my God, make it stop. And so, especially when I first came into being a political person, it was really out of style. it was like I kept my meditation practice secret. I felt like I would really be judged by other people in my communities for doing anything self-help or spiritual. We had a super strong critique of both of those realms for very good reasons. And many people had a lot of like violence they had experienced in those kinds of realms. And yet I really wanted to work on some of my own suffering. And I wanted to show up in my relationships differently. I felt my own distress in groups and dating and all the places, that I think are pretty common in the teens and early 20s, especially. And I was like hungry to study whatever would help. And um, so it's interesting. I feel like I've had two areas of study my whole life. Like, how do people make change? What gets in the way? What are people doing now? What did they do before? What actually works? And then, like, how do I liberate myself from these things? And I think maybe part of the reason so many people we know are starting to study somatics and other healing modalities is because I think when you hang out in the movement for a little while, you're like, oh, everything falls apart or doesn't based on how we treat each other. And we're all coming in with all the baggage of our experiences and our cultural conditioning, and we need support. And I've ended up spending a lot of time in movement spaces, um, supporting people in conflict, and trying to help groups figure out ways to create good spaces for shared decision making. And so, yeah, I've been writing this book for about 10 years, and feeling very uncertain and insecure about that pretty much the whole time, because I was like, everyone's gonna laugh at me for writing a self-help book, or it's not political and serious. And I imagine certain people saying I was neoliberal, etc., because of valid critiques of the wellness industry and certain narratives of self-care, and also because of what I think are sometimes like ableist and anti-feminist and other ways of thinking about like relationships are like girl stuff and other pieces. Um, but yeah, and I think that most of us treat each other are the very worst when it comes to something that involves sex or dating. um that's those are the most dangerous relationships in our lives for violence. And um it's just an area where there's a lot of just intense unresolved conflict, and so many social movement groups fall apart because of breakups and people taking sides and campaigning against each other and unethical behavior of many kinds. And so it feels like a juicy area in need of support, even for people who don't engage with sexual and romantic relationships themselves. Like everyone is affected by somebody else's, if not their own. So yeah, that's some of the origins of it.
Mm, thank you so much for that, Dean. And I just want to say, like, every time you said like an imagined kind of like negative thought about you writing this book, that it would be like for girls or not serious or not political or horror of horrors, neoliberal, my own soul just kind of like resonated and cried in response as somebody who has been in the wellness world for a long time and like received those critiques and hearing the validity sometimes of them while also knowing that the work of relational healing is so deeply important. So I want to say, I don't think you're neoliberal. I don't think your book is neoliberal. I bless your book in the world for whatever that is worth. And I deeply affirm that everything falls apart or stays together based on the way that we treat one another. Um, that said, maybe it would be juicy to go like right into some of those critiques right now and kind of talk about how you and your book like understand and address those. So um now as I understand it, the critique of psychotherapy and psychiatry from activist communities is that, first of all, those disciplines have inflicted a huge amount of harm on huge amounts of people. Queer and trans people certainly not exempted, like at all. Like in fact, yeah, I mean, a huge part of the reason or part of the mechanism of oppression that we experience is based in psychiatric discourses about us. So that's one thing. It's colonial, it's queerphobic. There's a lot of problematics there. And then when you bring in the self-help industry and the pop psychology industry as well, those disciplines are really deeply individualist. Like there's sort of this idea, very popular in American life coaching, that if you just raise your vibration and you think positive and you stop being codependent, then everything will get better. And of course, what that ignores is the fact that we live in a society where there are power dynamics and there's something deeply victim blaming about telling people that they just need to heal themselves. And that's not what your book does. I see your work as being really, really careful to examine like where those kinds of neoliberal narratives creep in. I want to ask you, how do you see an activist movement transcending that kind of individualist and colonial thinking when it comes to self-care and collective care, so that we're really creating a movement that has healing at its heart in a way that is for the collective?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's a really good description of those critiques. Like there's this feeling like the self-help literatures take your problem out of its context. It's like you got dating problems, we're not going to mention heteropatriarchy. You got, problems at work, we're not going to mention capitalism and white supremacy as the context of the suffering. So the suffering is like just my suffering. And if I read this book or do this program, I'll be rich and skinny and married in 30 days, kind of vibe, like at its worst, right? And there's so many people in our communities trying to do something different than that, like trying to do like yoga that's not fat phobic, or like just people are mixing all of our different political critiques with different healing methods in ways that I think are really brave and cool right now. But the thing we're reacting to is like a wellness industry that really tells us your suffering is your individual problem and collective action is not the answer. And so I wanted this to not be like that. And I also really wanted to not inherit the ableism of the self-help books that posits like a normal body and mind. And of course those norms are also like racial norms and gender norms and family formation norms and so many pieces. And so even just going, like I pick things out of mainstream self-help books and put them in this book, but taking out the word healthy as the like healthy relationships, like, just trying to find ways to actually speak through the wisdom of our communities, but then look at what is helpful about some of these tools or frameworks, and maybe mix them more with things from our communities. And I definitely, and you can never do this kind of stuff right, no doubt. I'll find out from people like which parts I missed and where I reproduced things that don't work. But I just have this desire for us to have a little more shared common sense in our movement spaces about emotional reactivity and emotional awareness, about compassion for ourselves and others during strong feelings, about what it's like to notice how I react when others have strong feelings around me, and potentially build skills to show up in ways that might be useful. Like, how to notice when I'm having a strong feeling, and before the action of like writing you that reactive email or wanting someone kicked out of the group or disappearing, I might be like, oh, I'm afraid. It's okay to be afraid. Like and then once I know I'm afraid, might I have a little pause that helps me? Oh, I want to talk to a friend, or I want to take a walk before I decide whether to write the email, or I want to talk to an elder about how things like this go, or whatever. But just, I think that millimeter of awareness that I'm having a strong feeling might reduce the likelihood that I'll do something that's disorganizing to my community or that I regret. Or it might help me apologize when I get the feedback that the thing I did was hurting. So that's kind of like very humble hope of this book, is it gives us a few ways in, like it identifies some common patterns that happen again and again, and we can read it and be like, oh, that's not just me. Actually, that's just happening to us. I'm not bad, or that's not just her. It's happening to us. She's not bad. And then like we can name it together, like just like that. We might support each other. Like, oh, hey, friend, I think you're disappearing into your new relationship. Stay with us. Happy for you. And, just common patterns. I'm hopeful that this book might, like, part of what I wanted to do with the design is make it really like you could send a screenshot to your friend. Everybody doesn't have to read the book. You could just share a list or a chart from the book, and people could just share it around like that when it's useful. I also tried to make mutual aid like that. Like, just could we just have some kind of some language, some tools that's ideally non-judgmental and names about kind of the stuff we all do over and over again.
Mm, thank you so much for that answer. There's so much there. And I just really want to uplift how your work to me lands as very much non-judgmental, but also very precise. Um, which is like I think like a deeply therapeutic skill of communication, to be able to tell the truth without also making somebody or a group of somebody's bad or evil or wrong. And this is something you do so well in the book, is that you acknowledge that there are these many harmful patterns that emerge, and many of them come from trauma, some from social conditioning. And it's not like we have to beat ourselves up, or think of ourselves as sinful or something. You diagnose the problem and you give us some really clear solutions, which I think is really helpful. I notice there's someone in the chat also kind of echoing this. They're saying, what would be the horror of impurity, um, of maybe accidentally slipping into the ocean of neoliberalism that surrounds and consumes us? Can we make space for people to not be perfect? And I think that the book is actually really advocating for that in so many ways. Okay, I'm going to get into some juicy specifics now. Do we have time? Yes, I think we do. So I want to ask you about one of my favorite topics, which I also think is kind of controversial, which is boundaries. So the book gives us a lot of very specific ideas and advice about boundaries. And as you acknowledge in it, the topic is fraught. Like, nobody really knows how to clearly lay out what a boundary is, or where my boundary ends and yours begins. Um, and I personally had never heard of that term until I was 26 and working in a hospital family therapy program. I literally learned the word or the term because I was filling out a form, like an assessment form that was like, what are these families' boundaries? And I was like, boundaries. That's like there's one person and then there's another person, and then some things should or shouldn't happen between them. Like, it was like I had to figure it out. And I remember when the light bulb went off, I was like, oh, a boundary, I see. Because I just had not been raised in my own family of origin or in my activist community to have any concept of boundaries. And when I got it, it was life-changing. That said, I had an indigenous friend and theorist who pointed out to me a few years ago that there are some parallels between this like Eurocentric idea of borders that comes from European descended psychology and nation state borders, which of course is such like a painful thing. And I think a big critique I see these days, a struggle I see with this idea of boundaries, is that we can sometimes use the idea like a boundary is a rule. Like, My boundary is that you have to give me a diamond ring if you want to be my partner. My boundary is that you may never speak to me unless you first like use a very specific code phrase. My boundary is that you have to do what I want, essentially. And I think this is not really how it works. So I want to ask you, how do you personally define boundaries? And I made a joke about this when I wrote you this question earlier. Bonus points if you can define boundaries and not cite Brene Brown or Prentice Hemphill, who are lovely, but also I want to know what you think.
Yeah, I love this question and your example of that dynamic that you're seeing. I can really relate to seeing that dynamic. I almost didn't want to put the word boundaries into the book because it's so overused. You know what I mean? That like, what do people, sometimes when something's used a lot, especially during conflicts, and then it kind of just feels like, what does that mean? Like sometimes I think I never want to introduce a lot of jargon, but sometimes I want to introduce simple words that let you think of the idea in a new way. Anyway, I decided to use the word boundaries. And to me, what it really means is like something about the process by which I decide I can say yes, no, and maybe. And the difficulty of that, like how hard it is in a totally coercive society to have real consent, to know what I want. You ask me and I just want to say yes. That's who I am. I'm a yes guy, and to how long it took me to be able to say, I'm allowed to have a pause. I'm going to wait 24 hours before I respond, or to say no. And how personally I still find it exhausting and painful to say a lot of my no's, certain kinds, like many people. And some people are automatic no's and they struggle to get to yes, right? And so, like that lifelong process of trying to find my authentic desire and response and express it to another and then the other part of that is being able to hear another's yes, no, or maybe and accept that. There's a lot of people in our culture pressuring each other to do things. And in a lot of my relationships, I noticed we never asked a question we were going to get a no to. We would work around it. I'm finding out whether you'd like to do it before I just directly say, like real fear of asking people and also of accepting people's responses. This is like kind of everything, like if we can't do this, no wonder we struggle with, obviously in the realm of sexuality, this is huge, but also in the realm of collaborating on a project and knowing I'm too tired, my plate is too full, any of it. And what I related to what you were diagnosing, what I've noticed, sometimes when people first start doing healing work, they learn the idea of boundaries and they practice no really hard. They're like, no, 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 which I think is great, honestly. I think we should congratulate them while they're doing that, even if it's like mildly annoying. But the other thing that happens is sometimes we learn what we're sensitive to. Sometimes people use a word like trigger, and then they want it to be a rule for others. So like, I don't like getting feedback about things in the house. I found that out. And now I think no one should give me any feedback about things in the house, because when I was a child, I got unfair feedback or some good reason. But the point of learning about our reactivity or our sensitivities is not to boss other people around. You know what I mean? It's to manage I'm like, oh wow, friend, I'm having a big stir about that feedback, and that's mine. And I need a minute or whatever, but it's not to shut you up from ever giving me that feedback. That's not going to work, And so how do we take our growing awareness of our emotional histories and our reactions and not wield them against others? The last thing I'll say about this, I think I'm in like some major boundary work for myself right now. And what I'm noticing is like these kind of this healing question. Like on the one hand, I always want to be learning to be more flexible in areas where I've been rigid and like to kind of accept others more the way they are, to find out if I really need it to be just my way or not. And on the other hand, I'm always trying to find out what I really want and need and express it, like be assertive enough. And figuring out whether right now in the interaction we're having in a given moment, it's time to practice more flexibility or more assertiveness is really confusing. And most of us have kind of tendencies that are telling us, don't do that when it's not safe. Anyway, so I've just been noticing how it really helps me to talk to my friends when I'm trying to figure out if now is a moment for greater flexibility or a greater assertion of my preferences. Um, and so they might say to me, "Oh, Dean, I've noticed in that relationship, you don't assert yourself a lot, or you're kind of hard on that person. Like maybe let them have it their way, or whatever it is." I think that's like kind of a enacting our boundaries question that I'm in right now.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that really generous answer. I see there's a lot of great thoughts bubbling in the chat about that as well. But I do just want to pull out, like, I think you gave us two really powerful definitions of boundaries. And one that I heard you say was boundaries are about the capacity to deeply know the yes, no, and maybe within ourselves, and to deeply hear and respond to the yes, no, and maybe in other people. And the second one, I think you said, was that boundaries are not about bossing other people around, but creating more liberation for all of us. And I think that's so key. Like I might have to get those like on a t-shirt or something to give to my clients. Um, yes, I see in the chat that Liberty is inviting folks to share questions in the chat. Some folks are already doing so. That's great. Please continue. Dean, I'm going to ask you one more question of my own and then open it up to the audience. Does that sound okay? Fabulous. Well, it actually really relates to this last piece you were just sharing with us about, do I work on flexibility where I've been too rigid, or do I work on firmness where I've been too flexible? Which to me is kind of like a paradox. And something I've noticed about doing healing work and also conflict work in movement is that we are immersed in paradoxes and they're so painful. And to get away from the ambiguity and the uncertainty, we sometimes fall into dogma or we fall into this kind of over rigidity. You were very brave and in your book gave us like a pretty clear distinction between conflict and abuse, which I think has been controversial to queer community since 2016. I joke much longer, but that is when Sarah Schulman's Conflict is Not Abuse came out and everybody had a big fight about it. Um, and it's questions like that, like where is the distinction between conflict and abuse? I see in the Q&A box also there are some questions about ambiguities and paradoxes, like how do we hold people accountable while not being seen as punitive? That's an important question that's we're going to get to later tonight from the Q&A box. But I see so much of what you've been telling us tonight and in your book as about cultivating the capacity to be with ambiguity. In a way that is generative and creative rather than reactive. Um, and I guess my question for you is just, what's your advice about that? Like being inside the paradox and tolerating the ambiguity of not always knowing when you should be more flexible or more firm, and also knowing that sometimes you might get it wrong. How do you live inside that?
Yeah. I really notice that when I'm in periods of like less stress or when I'm more resourced in some way, I can tolerate ambiguity better and I can tolerate other people's mistakes better and I can forgive myself for my mistakes better. And when I'm more tired, more stressed out, overworked, grieving something, I am more reactive and more self-shaming. And one thing that's going on is like we're all having a really hard time. Like it's really bad and it's just really the conditions are just really scary. And people we love are really getting hurt and we're getting hurt and we can tell it's getting worse. And so we have to be so forgiving right now. And it's hard to do that when we're freaked out. Like it just kills me to think of us not only enduring what's emerging materially, but then also like not being gentle enough with each other and ourselves at the same time when we most need each other. You used the word equanimity at the beginning of this conversation, and I don't know if other people study Buddhism at all, but in Buddhism, there's phrases associated with different of these abodes, but equanimity is one of them. And the phrase that I love associated with equanimity is, "This is how it is now." And I feel like a lot of the like wellness culture and stuff is like, think positive, tell yourself you love yourself. I'm like, when I don't feel good, I mean, I find it very hard to go all the way to like, I love Dean. Rough. That's not where I'm coming from. But like, you're scared. This is how it is now. Like, just like, this is what it's like, Dean. And especially for me, you're scared or something like that is kind of like, it's just the truth. It's not trying to be like everything's going to be great, or we're told to skip everything that's hard about not knowing. I mean, none of us know what's going to happen. Like, is it going to be okay? I have no fucking idea. And there's a kind of like liberalism style hope that's like, just tell people everything's going to be fine. And I'm like, actually, let's be in a lot of fear and grief together and then like fight till we die. Like, that seems more grounded. I don't know if it's going to be okay. Most people who've lived through terrible things didn't know what was going to happen and then hopefully chose caring action. That's kind of, for me, that feels like, I just think it puts people at ease when we're like, yeah, it's really bad. Instead of like, we're gonna, there's a skipping. There's a skipping about ecological crisis. There's a skipping about fascism. So I think holding ambiguity, holding nuance is really hard. I think that's why we need our friends. Like when I am going through a breakup or a thing that's hard with roommates or whatever, or with the group I'm in, and I'm like, they're the worst. I hate them. I might need friends to be like, oh, it hurts. You're in a lot of pain. They're part of our community. So we're gonna not go after them or destroy the group, or right now that stuff is happening a lot between us. What would it take to care for our feelings, not be like, if we don't all go after them, it means this didn't happen to me, but instead, this is happening. How can people who are not as activated as me right now help me think about how to prevent this from happening again, what I need to be well, like if there's some practical steps that could be taken. It's like there's just a kind of, I'll just give one example of this. Asking ourselves and each other, you know, should I DM this person, or should I post about how they're terrible? DM them first if they're at all a part of your community and you could influence them. That's organizing. When we go after someone straight public, that's like our targets. Like the university president, start by writing the article about how they're terrible. But if it's like another person in my community who's trying to do good stuff and did something that didn't work for me, or that you didn't know had a certain impact on people I love, could I talk to you first? Before, that's these are hard, nuanced questions. Like, where's the line? I mean, the way this has come up in some of these conversations is kind of like, when do I break up with like the person or the group, or the, hard to know what could still be influenced and what's kind of time to walk away. I gotta talk to my people about that. And then if someone is asking me about that and I'm the friend, could I not just join their reactivity and be like, we're gonna get him? Or not just dismiss what happened and be like, you're fine, it doesn't matter. But instead be like, huh, that's a really good question. Is it time to DM them or to put them on blast? Is it time to leave the group or to try to get the group to be more principled? I just really think these are matters of like shared discernment, and most people are very isolated. And so like the number one call in this book is to like make more friends and connections of all kinds, because we are just really needing each other for discernment, for the immediate. I need local people. I need people far away who I connect with online. I'm depressed. I'm anxious, whatever it is. Like, We just all need a much deeper bench than we have. And that, I think that's what we need to keep going, especially in this moment.
Thank you so much, Dean. Liberty, I see you're appearing. Yeah, please.
Great. This has been a fantastic conversation already. And we do have quite a few questions in the Q&A, some of which are really meaty. So I'm going to do my best to pull some, and apologies to anyone whose questions we don't get to, because we probably won't be able to cover them all. But yeah, just to kind of start right off, there are a couple people asking kind of broadly about things that we might think of as related to canceling. So just to read a question from one attendee, they've asked to hear thoughts on how and when a person should be asked to leave a group if they've been consistently causing hurt to others in that group and are not open to feedback or conversation about their impact. And this person notes that they don't want to contribute to canceling or isolation, but they also want to care for the well-being of the whole group. And that feels like a perennial and useful question to reflect on.
It's such a hard question, because each situation is so specific. I mean, I think like we always want to move towards people who are doing hard things if it's safe for us to do so, like those of us maybe who are not directly in the line of fire or are feeling we have capacity to move towards them, make sure they know how their impact is landing on others. A lot of times in our movements, we just don't give the feedback. It's just direct communication is really, really hard in a kind of throw people away society. We're all afraid of being thrown away. We're afraid if we tell somebody something, they'll be defensive. They often are, So making sure people have really had a chance to hear how they're landing on others, to find out what's happening for them. Sometimes getting someone like, oh, I know, you know what? That person really gives a fuck what this person thinks about them. I'm gonna ask them if they'll talk to them. Like really being creative. Like, who could they hear this from? Somebody with a certain relationship to them, somebody with a certain identity, someone with a certain role in the group, and really bringing that with clarity and love, I think is really important. And it is absolutely okay to ask people to leave groups, or it's okay to leave a group. Like we have to, consent requires that. It's also really okay for groups to split. I think a lot of times I see people like, especially if a group has a name, like it's a chapter of a group that's all around the country, or if it's people are like, they get like into it about tactics, and it's like you could just have two of them and do the different tactics and also not talk shit about each other and just be like, we're doing this one, we're doing this one, good luck, how's it going, let's report back. So yes, breaking up is okay, and it can be really generative to break up or split or change. And I really love this question asker's desire to not throw away and to not have that be the go-to, because it is, when people get kicked out of groups, it really, really brings up other experiences of betrayal and exclusion. It can really be hard on people, and this kind of cancel stuff, like it causes great harm. So how to make sure our group isn't cliquish? Are we just keeping someone on the outs because they're socially different or different age or identities? Have we made our group a welcoming place? Like most groups don't talk very much in the group about group dynamics. We get out the food or we do the banner drops. And so we haven't given people a chance to like show up to the group and grow new emotional skills together, which we all need because we didn't learn how to be in cool horizontalist radical groups when we were at our jobs and schools and terrible families, right? So doing that work, a lot of the second half of mutual aid is about that, like trying to have people have those conversations before they're in a big fight in the group. And even like at the beginning of our meetings, we can remind ourselves of principles of direct feedback and forgiveness, not gossip and ghosting. We can remind ourselves that we do what we say we're going to do and let others know if we can't, and that there's no judgment about that. And, we can just try to create a culture of care and principles around the things that are the kind of biggest tripwires for all of our groups. And that sometimes skills people up so that someone doesn't come in and then they look like they're constantly messing up, but they just haven't like had enough chance to like try on a new culture and its skills. Like it takes so much repetition. Also, we shouldn't expect that we give someone feedback once and they change. I mean, how many times did someone have to tell you, when you give me advice instead of listening to me, I don't like it? For me, it was a lot of times. You know, like, or whatever, like whatever, you know, we all know kind of some of our relational troubles. And like usually it's like, oh wow, that's the third friend who's told me I ditch people when I start dating someone, or that's the fifth coworker who's told me that I don't do my dishes or whatever, you know. So just remembering people deserve repetition and might need it. And and then yes, you can get to a principled place where you want a break from someone of any kind, you know.
I think it's such a great answer, Dean. I think speaking a little bit to the question as well, I'll just say I see in the Q&A box too, there's kind of like some of the questions on this theme are, I think, asking about the importance of acknowledging, as you do in the book, that some of us, well, that our social locations, embodied experiences, and identities affect how we experience groups and like whether or not there is space, or how safe or not safe it is to be inside of ambiguity. Um, like and I think that sometimes the heart of this type of question, which I get a lot too, is like, we want to make space for the person to get feedback, usually multiple times. But let's say the fuck up in the group is the person is repeatedly misgendering a trans woman of color over and over and over again. And it's well and good to say, oh, we want to give them space and we should give them feedback multiple times, etc. But every time they do it, they are contributing to harming someone else. And so this is kind of like the push and pull paradox, that I think like reading your book in its entirety really helps us to be with, which is that really I think what you're telling us is there isn't like a mathematical formula that we can use to say, okay, that's it. That's when the person has to go. But we're trying to hold the deep dignity and humanity of all people involved, and depending on each case, on a case by case basis, like we're gonna have to find that discernment together. Like, when is it okay to make room for a repeated mistake and give repeated feedback, and when do we actually need someone to leave the group and not come back until they can consistently demonstrate that they're not going to be transphobic or whatever.
I want to add one more level of this too, which just is this feels really hard to say and risky sometimes, but there's an idea that I learned from like generative somatics, people like Prentice Hemphill and Stacey Haynes, of self-generated safety that is really challenging in our culture because we don't want to do victim blaming. This is not, don't use self-generated safety against others, but I can use it with myself to notice what would make me be able to tolerate others' mistakes more. So, for example, I've been in a lot of groups where people come in and misgender because it's their first time using, like knowing what a pronoun is and like meeting trans people maybe and using their pronouns correctly. And I noticed that when I'm in a group where I feel that a lot of people in the group get me and see me, I can tolerate more of those mistakes than when I'm in a group where I'm like, I'm the only trans person. People here don't have my back. So what can like basically, but I could stay in a reactive mode of being like, I'm never safe. And if anyone says this once, I've got to go. But I want to be able to stay in longer. So even just practicing with myself, what can I do to feel safer around others? Is there anything? And there's no pressure on this. No one has to be like become more durable to this, but sometimes I want to be more able to tolerate the mistakes of especially new people who are coming from a different situation and just know different stuff, you know, like, and I want to be like, I'm going to sit here and talk to you for a long time about why I'm a police abolitionist or what this pronoun is or whatever. And yeah, and just kind of asking myself, how can I let my existing safety land and be a resource to me when I have to do something risky? Can I become more so comfortable that I'm not as hurt by other people's mistakes, especially if they like kind of have good intentions and we're moving towards like a better relationship. Anyway, it's just kind of like um, a question, I think, of seasoned organizers welcoming newbies. And we just need movements that are so much bigger. So we gotta like let these people in and not have them have to already know our words or whatever. And also we get to be like, no, or I'm not going to be the one to talk to that person about that. Would somebody else? Or yeah, all of our no's are essential. And then sometimes the next layer can be like, I'm safe enough in the support I have in my life or how I know myself to tolerate this conversation.
Thank you so much for those answers. Since you brought up somatics in the answers, maybe this question from someone who's interested in learning more about somatics and is asking for like resource recommendations or things that y'all have found particularly compelling. And they do note that they would love resources with cultural factors and a social justice lens. Thoughts on maybe what people should reach for?
Do you want to lead on that one? I feel like you're more centrally in.
Sure. Well, what I will say is I think we're kind of at a like a transition point when it comes to politicized somatics in social justice movements in the global north, which is to say, generative somatics has for a long time been kind of a central network around that. And still, like I would really encourage people to check out the generative somatics social media for more information about how to learn somatics. That said, I think that network is transforming and kind of like spreading, and folks are kind of making some different choices around how they want to be organized at the moment. I know, but I think it's a bit too early to talk about that there are some very exciting politicized somatics and trauma healing ideas that are growing. And so I guess what I would say is stay tuned. I hope to be promoting some of those like bigger projects shortly, like within a year. I'll say also the Resilience Toolkit is a really fabulous foundational somatics program that was developed by Income Indefo, and she runs training programs regularly through her organization, Lumos Transforms. Um, some of you are recommending the teaching that I do at the Embody Lab, which is very delightful. Thank you so much. And someone is recommending Resma Menakem's Black Octopus Society as well. So what I would say is, yeah, check out the resources that are available now. But I think there's some really exciting developments that are going to be emerging in the next year or so. Dean, anything you would add to that?
Great, thank you so much. So another question from the Q&A, we've got an attendee who's asking sort of about learning how to say no and maybe when boundary setting is kind of a foreign concept, and noting specifically like dealing with like some autistic burnout around this type of communication. Any suggestions for folks who might be having that experience?
Such a good question. One thing I recommend in the book, I think I wrote this in there, is like when we're starting to try to feel our boundaries, it can be helpful to do the kind of boundaries that parents do with children, but with ourselves, like having a bedtime, making sure you eat your meals. Did I drink my water? Like we all have different areas where that could be helped. Less screen time maybe, or don't stay out late too many nights a week or whatever, but that can kind of like warm us up to the part of boundaries that isn't just the like pain of having to say no to another and see maybe their disappointment, but instead the benefits of what we get to keep for ourselves. And I feel like it's helped me like know how I feel about things, because a lot of times I don't know that I want to say no. I just am in an autopilot, like everything anyone else wants me to do sounds great. you know, and something about that kind of really basic self-parenting. And maybe for some of us, we didn't get that in some areas, or something like going to bed was scary, or eating was an area of conflict, or we've relied on screens in some way to cope. And so building up some of that, like, what do I really want here? And how can I be my friend in it, or my parent? And maybe using, also, I really love, like, I've used sticker charts a lot to like reward myself for this stuff. Like, I have some really pretty stickers, you guys. Um, or like I've had a friend, like, we're gonna text each other at bedtime, time to go to bed, so, like, getting outside help too from somebody who cares about you. That kind of stuff can be an easier start. And then I've also done things like I had a 24-hour hold on any of a certain kind of request. Or if anyone asked me to travel anywhere, I had to ask my friend Angelica before I could do it. Like, getting some other people in the mix who know my tendency to say yes and can help me evaluate. Even just thinking of Angelica, I would be like, right, I don't want to go to Detroit in January. I would, like, I would remember, oh, the weather and the class I have to teach. But when I didn't think of Angelica and talking to her, I was like, I love this person who's inviting me, of course. So those are just some very basic things that have helped me. And I do, in the book, there's kind of a chart about boundaries that even reading it may be useful. I don't think we should always try to work out our boundaries in a processing conversation with someone who is asking us for something. Be with myself, and it be with someone who doesn't have any stake in it, and Angelica isn't like mad if I don't go to Detroit. So she's a great person for me to have a more real conversation with, to find out, what do I think about this?
I love that. Now I really want some stickers of my own. Thank you for that really great idea. Maybe just a couple things I'll add to that are in somatic sex education, which is the lineage that I studied with first, we talk a lot about the sacred pause, which is literally pausing in a situation where we're not sure what our boundaries are. Like, we're not sure if we're a yes, no, or maybe, or if we want to do something for ourselves, if we're just willing to do it because we love another person, or we're tolerating or enduring something because we don't think we can say no safely. And the sacred pause is like a small somatic tool that's really like just stopping and checking and not proceeding until we feel the sense of yes, no, or maybe inside of ourselves. A sacred pause can be 30 seconds after somebody asks you, may I kiss you, or something like that. It could also be 3 hours or 3 days or 3 years after somebody asks you, may I kiss you? Of course, after 3 years, they may no longer want to, etc. But that pause is ours to take, or should be. And then the second thing I'll say about that is, as collectives, it can be really powerful to create a culture of noticing and offering gratitude for when people show their boundaries, particularly the no boundary or the maybe boundary. When people say no at a meeting, for example, like, no, I can't take on that task or that action item. If the group has a practice of saying, thank you for your no, thank you for telling us your boundary, it becomes much less scary overall. So I guess what I'm saying is we shouldn't have to do it all by ourselves.
Fantastic, thank you. Great, I think we probably have time for maybe just one more. I'm gonna attempt to pull from a few different questions. There's quite a few people here, and Kai Cheng already kind of gestured towards this, who are interested in and struggling with power dynamics that come up in relationships and in communities. So I'll read one of them, although, like I said, this is something that quite a few people are thinking about. So one of our participants tonight says, I've recently become disabled, and I now depend on my partner for some basic day-to-day survival stuff. So where fear of abandonment used to be something I could therapize or intellectualize away, abandonment now feels very real and like an actual threat. This person says, the power dynamic between me, disabled, but also the primary earner, and my partner, neurodivergent, and a caretaker, is new for both of us. So my question is, how do we navigate these new dynamics and consider the more physical potential of abandonment, even if it's temporary, without playing into harmful patterns? And I think if you want to answer this question very specifically, you can, but I think also just broadly thinking about how we navigate power dynamics and address them, and the possibility that power dynamics, one thing very interesting about this question is that dynamics can change sometimes within relationships. And I think that's also an interesting facet to this.
Yeah, I really love this question. There's a part of this book where I'm talking about fear of abandonment and fear of engulfment as like two huge fears that get kicked off in relationships all the time. And then, often cause us to go into a kind of panic where we act in ways we sometimes regret. And some of us in certain relationships get kind of stuck in either a fear of abandonment or a fear of engulfment, or are kind of replaying some dynamics we had in our childhood lives where we felt where we were abandoned or where we had over intervening caregivers. So it's just like a really heavy area. And in that, I'm quoting a lot this guy, David Richo, whose work I like, but he says adults cannot be abandoned, only left, and cannot be engulfed, only like someone can try to control you, but you can actually get rid of them. You can leave if you need to. And of course, as this question brings up, that's not exactly true, because some of us have interdependencies where someone not showing up could be like life or death or something really bad, And I really appreciate that, the complexity of that like it can feel like if this cute boy doesn't text me back, I'm gonna die. And I can be like, Dean, you're not gonna die. But like for some of people I love in my life, if someone doesn't show up and do a few things in their house and with their body, they could actually like die or get injured or be incredibly uncomfortable. So, and that stuff does change because we will all go through experiences of illness and disability and other crises or long-term experiences of interdependency changing. And still also be having fear of abandonment and fear of engulfment while we're also having new relationships of needing each other. I think something I don't like in our communities sometimes is a desire to name a bunch of power dynamics and not talk about our feelings. And this can be the kind of like, I need you to do everything I want because I just named that I'm trans and you're not, or, like a kind of like, we can kind of use our politics and about our identities and experiences as a shortcut around like, I'm feeling really scared right now. And this also, like both are always happening, the political conditions and our identities and a whole set of emotions. Like and they're all interwoven. And a little bit our communities can go into like a contest about oppressions rather than really what's happening between us right now, which interweaves with those differences. So one of the things I'm always wanting to do, I've been thinking about this a lot lately in relationships I have where there's financial interdependency, which I think can be beautiful. I think we should all share our resources, and also stuff comes up with that. Shame on both sides, fear of controlling others or being controlled. So how to be with that and talk as openly about it as possible. I have this fear of you seeing me this way. I have a fear of this happening. And it's my fear. Like, I think the whole piece is I'm sharing my fear of feeling. It's not an accusation about you. And then, oh, can I give you any reassurance about your fear? You're afraid you're not desirable because we have this different interdependency right now, or you're afraid I'll leave you. The final thing I'll say about interdependency, it's more dangerous the more isolated we are in it. So just how can we all have bigger care teams? I know that's hard to say because it's not available for everyone. But that is one of our paths. The more we can all join more people's care teams and be open to that kind of intimacy with more people, not just a partner or family member, and the more we can ask that of each other and normalize asking for that kind of help, the less hard the weight of these interdependencies will be, especially at the moments where we're getting used to new dynamics.
I think that's a fabulous answer, Dean. I think we could talk about it all night, but I also want to honor our time for closing. So just thank you so much for everything you just shared and for this amazing book. I'll say quickly, I forgot to mention that Stacey Haynes has an online somatics course called The Politics of Trauma. That's really, really fantastic for folks who are advanced or entry level. So if folks interested in somatics, maybe check that one out too.
Thank you. And we are going to end with a poem that I've really been turning to a lot lately. I feel like these are kind of ritual spaces. People are having a hard time or living under immensely painful conditions. And I find this poem really useful. I tend to read it every morning. And so we're gonna read it back and forth, me and Kai Chen. And the poem is called Life Chant, and I'm gonna share my screen. It's called Life Chant by Diane DePrima. It's from the 1970s. And I put it on the screen as well in case it's easier. And I want to invite you all to say the refrain of "May it continue" at home with yourself. It's also a great thing to pass around in a group, and everyone says "May it continue" together. I've ended a lot of and started a lot of meetings this way lately. Cacophony of small birds at dawn. May it continue. Sticky monkey flowers on bare brown hills. May it continue. Bitter taste of early miner's lettuce. May it continue. Music on city streets in the summer nights. May it continue. Kids laughing on roofs, on stoops, on the beach, in the snow. May it continue. Triumphal shout of the newborn. May it continue. Deep silence of great rainforests. May it continue. Rolling fuck of great whales in turquoise ocean. May it continue. Clumsy splash of pelican in smooth bays. May it continue.
Clean snow on the mountain, may it continue. Rite of birth and of naming, may it continue. Rite of instruction, may it continue. Rite of passage, may it continue. Love in the morning, love in the noon sun, love in the evening among crickets, may it continue. Long tales by fire, by window, in fog, in dusk on the mesa, may it continue. The night music, may it continue. Grunt of mating hippo, giraffe, foreplay for the snow leopard, screeching of cats on the backyard fence, may it continue.
Without police, may it continue. Without prisons, may it continue. Without madhouses, marriage, high schools that are prisons, may it continue. Without empire, may it continue. In sisterhood, may it continue. Through the wars to come, may it continue. In brotherhood, may it continue. Though the earth seem lost, may it continue. Through exile and silence, may it continue.
With cunning and love, may it continue. As woman continues, may it continue. As breath continues, may it continue. As stars continue, may it continue. May the wind deal kindly with us. May the fire remember our names. May springs flow, rain fall again. May the land grow green. May it swallow our mistakes. We begin the work. May it continue. The great transmutation, may it continue. A new heaven and a new earth, may it continue. May it continue.
Thank you so much for doing that with me. Thank you so much to Liberty, Carrie, Brandon, Monica, everyone who works at Firestorm and worked to make this possible, and everyone who came and shared so much wisdom in the chat.
And huge thanks to you, Dean and Kai Cheng, for being here to share your wisdom and your time and all of the incredible work that you've done and I know will continue to do. Have a good evening, folks.